Good afternoon. This is Ed Nair, Editor Global Services. Welcome to this webinar on perspectives and potential of Asia's hotspots. In this webinar, we would be discussing China and Philippines more in detail, but also throw a very good light on what's been happening overall in terms of the industry dynamics, in terms of the dynamics of various locations, to give a proper context to this region. Joining me in this webinar as the two analyst speakers from Tholons are Jonathan de Luzuriaga. He is the Managing Director at Tholons, and Manuel Ravago. He's the Research Director at Tholons, and he directs the overall locations-based research activity at Tholons. We are happy to partner with Tholons in this. Global Services and Tholons has been very, very instrumental in imparting information, research-based information to the outsourcing community over the last 5 years. And this year we started off this series of webinars, what is called as GlobalShore2010. It is the first webinar series that focuses solely on global outsourcing locations, a very comprehensive series that covers almost all the regions of the world from an outsourcing perspective. As I said, we began this joint effort about 5 years back when we were when Tholons came up with this very unique idea of looking at cities rather than specific countries, and that's been a very, very clear differentiator. So in 2006, we identified cities as a unit of as a unit of outsourcing location instead of countries. And ever since then, Tholons has been really improving and refining the methodology to understand the dynamics of emerging locations. In 2007, we came up with the concept of centers of excellence, and again utilize city as a unit. In 2008, we further enhanced the methodology and came up with the concept of how various centers of excellence develop, and putting them in the context of various regions. How can organizations look at a portfolio of locations? In 2009, there was much more detail in terms of how these centers of excellence emerge, and we also came up with the concept of city clusters, and how do city clusters develop. How to make a decision on specific city clusters, what are these city clusters known for, and basically how to map your strategy on the basis of that. And this year in 2010, as an enhancement to the overall research, Tholons has come up with this concept of point of scale resistance, which looks upon about 110 countries, and out of that, 45 countries have been studied in detail to look at as to what is that particular point what is that particular point at which there is a resistance to scaling up. So it's a very interesting concept, and we'll get to hear more about it in our successive webinars. This entire series of GlobalShore 2010 would end with the launch of the Top 100 Emerging Outsourcing Cities report. This would be launched on November 11th, the last webinar in our series. So as I mentioned, I would like to call upon the two top analysts from Tholons today, Manuel and Jonathan. So on to Manuel and Jonathan. Just before we break off into the main presentation, I would like to inform that we would be taking questions during the Q&A slot, but please feel free to send in your questions during the time the presentation is being taken, so that you don't miss the train of thought, and we would take these questions one by one during the Q&A slot. So over to you, Manuel and Jonathan, to your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Okay, so this is Manuel Ravago. I'm the Research Director for Tholons, as Ed had mentioned. And today I'll be discussing and handling the first part of the webinar and discussing the client market dynamics in the global services outsourcing landscape. Okay, so on to slide 4. On the first chart on slide 4, we see the global IT spends are expected to increase at a faster rate after 2009 and again increase after this year as many service buyer markets entangle themselves from the recession. Sorry. So if you look at the chart on the left, though growth may still be a bit tepid, it will nonetheless be significant and more significant than the previous 3 years, particularly on IT spends and the offshoring and outsourcing segments. Now, I'm sure many of us are wondering, what are the drivers pushing, this growth in technology spends? And, we've identified 4 of the main drivers that we've observed in Tholons. First is the cost reduction will remain the primary impetus for service buyers in increasing spending. Now, one of the key areas to watch here is the rate of acceleration for consumer spending in the consumer-driven U.S. market, specifically because many provider nations, like the Philippines, are very much dependent on providing support services for this particular market segment. So if you look at the U.S. consumer market, you would have the retail, the consumer goods, the travel, and related verticals, which are the main verticals to be looking at, and which contact support services in many provider nations are heavily invested on, such as the Philippines and India. Okay, one of the areas to look at also in terms of growth is growth in competition leading to need for scalable, optimized, and effective operations should also increase IT spends. Now we've analyzed that this trend is happening from both the service buyer and supplier side. Of course, service buyers look at IT to make operations more efficient, but more so in an increasingly competitive market landscape, service buyers now more than ever are also looking to better optimize their own operations. So from the service provider side, being more efficient would also allow them to offer more favorable costs to the service buyers. So it works both ways. It's businesses want to be more efficient, but at the same time, service buyers also want to be more efficient because it offers them the ability to lower costs, and it just makes it that much more attractive for them to as service buyers. One of the areas also to look out for in terms of IT spend and accelerating IT spend is the diversification of business and expansion into new markets. So now service buyers and clients extend their reach to non-traditional or what we call emerging service markets. Service providers will be pushed to enter these markets as well. One only needs to look at the tremendous interest in the Chinese domestic market and the regional South American market by North American and European companies, and watch how large Indian and American service providers have followed suit. So a very good example for this is the growing U.S. Hispanic population and how South America and Latin American service providers have really pushed themselves to to capture this market. And alongside of that, we've seen India move into South America as well, and develop their and expand their presence in South America to cater to this North American market. We've clearly seen as well the recent accelerated pace of mergers and acquisition activities by India's big 3 in South America, to validate this this analysis. Finally, on the drivers for technology spend, one of the areas that we've been looking at closely in the last few years is the growing SMB participation as a service buyer. So IT spend should pick up from the SMB sector, and globally at that. Now, this is one market segment that the supply side has struggled to efficiently tap to date, and there remain tremendous opportunities and rewards for service providers who will be able to provide services, who will be able to provide service solutions to this otherwise elusive and fragmented market. The reason for this fragmentation in our analysis is, so many service so many SMB markets and so many SMB segments have such distinct needs, right, as opposed to the larger enterprise-sized clients. So that's going to be a challenge for the supply side moving forward. But that challenge at the same time will be the opportunity. Now, looking at the chart on the right side, we see that there remains untapped opportunities for service providers as the offshore segment of outsourcing spends remain relatively small. Of course, not all processes can and will be offshored, but there remains a gap. If you look at it from an analytical perspective, this gap is actually the opportunity for service providers and the supply side. Now, to capitalize on the opportunity and to wrap up this slide, there's a couple of things that I want to mention now on how this opportunity can be tapped by the service providers and what the service providers need to look at to expand or on the offshore segment. First, on the first bullet, you'll see the identification of new delivery models and engagement models. The second is overhauling of existing resources. The third is foster innovation and IP assets. And the fourth and the last is to develop ready-to-deploy platforms, frameworks across multiple geographies. So ultimately, by taking these measures, service providers will be able to better manage their costs, if not reduce them completely, or if not to reduce them and mitigate costs. Now, this translates to a higher level of efficiency, which then leads to the provision of a more compelling value proposition to their clients, the service buyers, right? Okay, so I think we're done with this slide already, so let's move on to slide 5. Excuse me. Okay, so moving on to slide 5, again, we see on this slide how the demand side market is still largely composed of two regions in the globe. So that's the North American market and the Western European market. Now, we should continue to see this in the near term, but we should also see that the supply side will stretch across geographies and begin accelerating the pace of competition. So countries in South America such as Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Uruguay, to name a few, are some of the examples of countries in that region that will be vying to supply services for American clients catering to the Hispanic population. And the incumbent Indian providers will be continuing to build delivery centers in key delivery regions such as Latin America, Eastern Europe, and China. Yeah, again, as I mentioned, North America and Western Europe will be the primary sources of demand, but the domestic markets from the BRIC nations will also be an increasingly important player in the near term. Okay, so moving on to slide 6. Okay, on slide 6, we see that market potential in the Asia-Pacific region as evidenced by the robust growth rates of regional domestic economies. I mean, I'm sure everybody's aware of, the strong growth rates and the strong GDP figures that have been posted by China and India recently. And there's definitely a tremendous interest on catering to these domestic markets. But, as they continue to lead the way, and as they would in the near and medium terms, we wouldn't discount smaller countries like the Philippines and Vietnam, whose domestic growth rates are moving at an increasingly positive rate as well. So if you look at the Philippines, for example, which has a population of almost 1/3 of the U.S. or 100 million people, the Philippines is expected by the ADB, or the Asian Development Bank, to post a GDP of 6.2 for 2010, and this growth has been attributed to the higher domestic consumption. So that's that in itself is it's very promising for many service providers who have traditionally seen the Philippines just as a supply side component of the equation, right? But there is a strong domestic market